Hello, my name is Jim Rigdon. I'm being assisted by Tim Caldor, and we've been asked to put a video together about reel testing. In this particular case, we're going to be using OPGW. It's a brand new reel that we have to test out here at Panda Road Station. A couple things to begin with is obviously safety is paramount. We are in a lay-down yard, so safety vest, hard hat, steel-toe shoes are required. We also began today by filling out a JSA so that we went over the different hazards that are present here. A couple things to begin with is the tools that you're going to require to do this type of work. We have a grinding wheel that we use to cut off the OPGW. We also have a Dremel tool that we're going to be using to score the outer strands. We also have an OTDR. In this particular case, it is an Expo FTB1. We've also used an AXS 110 before, or whatever OTDR you have is available to you. We have a launch box that we're using to get outside of the dead zone of the OTDR, and in this particular case we are also using a barrel connector in order to go to a jumper that's disposable. We've cut the end off here and we'll utilize this for our testing. A couple things that you can do for this type of testing is either use, in this case we're going to use a 50S Fujikura that'll help us align the fibers, but you can also use a bare fiber adapter if that's what's available to you. In our particular case, we like the 50. It's a lot quicker than using a bare fiber adapter and a lot more accurate, and we'll show you those results as we go on. We also have to have a cleaver available to us to cleave the ends as we put the fibers in. The first procedure we need to do with the OPGW is to prepare it for the testing. One of the things that I look for is on the end of the cable, make sure that it's a nice clean cut, that there's no crushed buffer tubes inside of here. Sometimes when they come shipped in, there's damage on the cable itself, or sometimes if you have to do testing out on a line, there's going to be damage on the end. You want to cut that off clean, use your grinding wheel to give you a nice clean cut, and that way you're not pinching or damaging any fibers when you try to pull back and pull off the buffer tubes. We're also going to come up here and we're going to, I put 2 zip ties on the beginning here in order to hold the strands together, and we're going to use a Dremel tool and we're going to score the outer strands so that we can break them off and get access into the buffer tubes. Today's testing is going to be based upon the standard put out by construction. It's TC, the standard is TC-106. In this standard, it discusses the proper way to test when you have to test the fibers, also how to properly label the fibers, and also goes into details about fiber splicing, which doesn't apply to this particular video, but there's some good information inside of here. This standard can be found on the construction SharePoint site, and I will try to send a link out to everyone. We're continuing our preparation for the testing of the fiber. First thing we're doing is we're scoring the buffer tubes and then pulling off the tube and getting access to the fibers themselves, and also wiping them down. One of the steps we've done is we've identified the tubes themselves to figure out which one has so we get the fibers in the correct order. In this particular OPGW, the buffer tubes are marked with either no dot, 1 dot, or 2 dots, and we've attached zip ties in order to show that, so when we do our testing we know which group of fibers are which. Tim is scoring the buffer tubes in order to break them off to get access to the fibers. At this point we have finished extracting the fibers from the buffer tubes, and we've also cleaned them. We do not make them as clean as what we do in a splice case, just because all we're doing here is testing to get a length of the cable itself, and they don't have to be super clean. We're also stripping back the fibers so that we can be ready for testing. That way we don't have to pull up our strippers every single time we grab a fiber, and we'll clean all the fibers off at this point. We've stripped out all the fibers and we're ready to start the testing itself. I've set up the OTDR following the standard, which is project name, reel number, frequency to test with, and also the fiber number. The standard calls for testing at 1550 first, and if you suspect a problem, come back and test with 1310 and 1550. What I have found helpful is we just test with both frequencies from the very beginning. That way I have all the information. I set the OTDR to test at 5 seconds at each frequency, and for the very first fiber of the reel I'm going to set it onto auto mode so that it sets up its own parameters, but then I don't do that for the subsequent fibers. That way it speeds up the process a little bit more. So in this case on my OTDR I'm going to turn on the auto. I also have a 110 over here, and again we've got 2 frequencies set up on here. For the very first test where it says keep parameters, I'm going to set that to no, and then all subsequent tests after this I'm going to change that to yes. That way it doesn't reset up the test every single time, and that'll save several seconds per test. We've also have our splicer here. Now in this case we're going to be using a FSM 50S to do our testing, and the reason we do this is that there's a pause mode that you can enable on the fibers themselves. The splicer will line up the fibers close enough for us to do tests through the fiber. Now we've tried to do this with a 70, but the 70 unfortunately backs the fibers off and you can't get an accurate test on it. So on the 50, the way we set this up is we're going to hit the menu button. We go down to splice option. We're going to turn on pause 2. And then we can exit out of here. And now we're ready for our testing. You can also use a bare fiber adapter. If you're going to use a bare fiber adapter, I recommend setting your OTDR for real time first so that you're able to verify that you've got a good connection before you actually take on a trace. Now we're ready for our first test. We've got our OTDR hooked up to our launch box, going to a fiber jumper. We've cleaned and cleaved the jumper and put it into our splicer. We've also taken one of the fibers. One of the things we do is that we test the fibers. We don't test the fibers in order, but we do the buffer tubes in order. I also keep a notepad handy so that I can, if I notice a problem, I can annotate it and identify exactly which fibers have a problem. But I don't do the fibers in order because as long as I get the proper length out of everything, then I'm confident that all the fibers are good. We've loaded our first fiber into the splicer. We're going to go ahead and close the lid. We have it set to automatically begin the testing. If you watch the screen, you can see that it brings the fibers in there, it aligns it, and then it goes to pause. On our OTDR, I've got it set for auto. I hit my start button. For the very first fiber, it's going to do an acquisition and determine fiber length, so it sets the parameters. On the screen, you'll notice that there is an initial spike from the splicer. It's after my launch box, and a lot of times I end up with an echo over here because of the high reflection from the launch. But because going into the splicer and out of it, it's at the same level, I know I got a pretty good connection at that point. And I can also take a look at the length. At this point, a lot of times I'll move a marker out there at the end of the fiber so that I can continue to watch it and make sure all subsequent fibers are the same length. Now I'm going to compare the length that I got with my OTDR to the reel, make sure we're consistent. At this point, the next thing I have to do is I have to hit my reset button on my splicer. Otherwise, if I just open the lid up, it won't reset the holders to the correct position. At this point, we're ready for the next fiber. At this point, we're ready to test all the fibers. Nice thing is you do not have to wait till the test is completely done for the trace to fully show up on the OTDR. Because the laser turns off well before the trace is completely on the screen. And that is both for the unit we have here and the 110 that we've used in the past. You can also start the trace itself as the fibers start coming in. Kind of play with the settings a little bit. And you'll get into a rhythm where you can start flying through the fibers. Although you can do this testing by yourself, it is easier with a second person who runs the OTDR and confirms all the traces are good. We've tested the first 36 fibers, and according to the video here, it's taken us 14 and a half minutes to do the first 36. That's kind of typical for what we were able to do. We're going to pause the video now, do the rest of the testing, and then we'll show you how to clean up afterwards. We've completed the testing of the fibers. We then used the grinding wheel, the ankle grinder, to cut off the end of it to make a nice smooth end, and then put the plastic back onto it in order to make it waterproof so water doesn't build up inside the fiber. At this point, Tim is reattaching it to the reel, and we've completed the testing. We do mark the reel as being good, and we also have to make sure the number is visible on it. According to the standard, it's recommended to use spray paint when possible, and that completes the testing.